Yeah, I mean, I think we do. We will need growth, but I don't. I'm not sure you can inject growth in a way that A, would be meaningful and would last without. You can if you were prepared to say, we don't care about the AAA rating, we don't care about the fiscal rules. It's more important to have some short-term growth. Then you could indeed cut VAT. You could say, well, we can't possibly be reducing public spending at this moment because we need growth from wherever we can get it. And the reaction to that would be, as I say, you'd lose your AAA rating. You would say, well, the fiscal rules were set in a different time, although in this case they were set post-crisis. So the previous government abandoned its fiscal rules and had the excuse of saying, well, we didn't know this crisis was going to come along and be as bad as it was. But for a government which has established it, I think they have to be locked in to what they set out to do. And I genuinely think that the message from yesterday, you can debate whether it was too pessimistic or not, but was that the public finances are in a worse state than we thought. Any question of a fiscal stimulus, because no fiscal stimulus pays for itself over anything like the time period one would, it may be the case, if you believe in the incentive effects of reducing taxes. And I would think more there of reducing taxes on income rather than reducing taxes on spending. Then, after 10 years, you end up with more revenue than you started, which is the great argument for, reducing the higher rate of tax in the 80s, in 79 and in 88, because in the end it gave you a stronger economy and gave you a more attractive economy for people from outside. But it takes time. I mean, those effects don't come through straight away. And you'll remember that, both in 79, when the top and basic rates were cut, that was essentially a tax switch. VAT went up at the same time. It was not a big giveaway because, again, the public finances weren't particularly healthy there. And in 88, it was only done when it was believed that the public finances were so strong that it could be afforded. Governments can't do those kind of giveaways and get away with it even if the long-term benefits are going to come through, when the public finances are still so weak. And I whether it's bond yields gilt yields would shoot up to Italian levels, or I don't know, but the loss of credibility would, I think, be very, very damaging, because people would then, the one thing that, and I think, both in business, and people have different views in business, people have different views out there as individuals, but I think there's a general sense out there that, something had to be done to bring this under control. I think the public knows that deep down, which is why I don't think Labour is gaining as much traction for the alternative as it is. And just on the kind of lost decade or lost 2 decades point, I mean, there's 2 points I make on that. One is that every recovery, people almost imply that this is, the government is doing something ridiculously extreme, at the moment. That every recovery is accompanied by a fiscal tightening. There's a big fiscal tightening in the 80s, big fiscal tightening in the 90s, and obviously a huge fiscal tightening after the IMF intervened in 1976. It always happens. People almost imply this has never happened before. And the other thing is that second thing is that if you look at the OECD report, again the impression is given that Britain is somehow out on a limb with this ridiculous experiment of tightening fiscal policy when everybody else in the world has seen sense. We're roughly in the middle of the range of countries when it comes to the amount of fiscal tightening we're doing. We're not out on a limb, even though you could argue we should be out on a limb because our budget deficit was worse than others. And the other thing I'd say is that all this stuff about I think people have only come to call it lost decade, and since Japan had its first and then second lost decade, but you always get this deep gloom in the early years of after a recession. You know.
Overshooting.
Yeah, I mean, people thought, you know, the 1990s, it was going to be, you know, we're never going to get out of this. We're into a new slump, and at best, all we can hope for is a jobless recovery. You know, it's you know, and the same in the early 80s. People just they overshoot psychologically in their attitudes, and I think we're seeing some of that at the moment. So I'd be very sceptical about lost decades, and certainly 2 lost decades.
Please do.